Hi, folks. This is The Writing Life. I'm Stephen W. Long, and really pleased to have Kate Kaufmann back with us. Kate was a visitor before. When your book, Do You Have Kids? Life When the Answer is No, when that came out, the excuse that we're using is now her British version is out. So we get to do some of this, and we talked a little bit before we started recording. We want to try to get into process is one thing, but number one, first, welcome.
Thank
Good to have you back.
It's fabulous to be here.
Good to see you. Because this is kids, I'm not sure that this is where you're going with this, but the way I took it, we're coming up to the holidays. And I think that you maybe were indicating that holidays are, what, influenced by children, different because of children? What were you thinking about?
Well, the holidays that are coming up, the Thanksgiving and the Christmas
Sure.
holidays, are so very child-centric
Sure.
and make perfect sense for that. And there's so many traditions that revolve around the holidays and around family.
Right.
And particularly when you think about people who are single, who don't have children.
Right.
There are a whole slew of themes that can run through the holidays.
You bet.
And also when...
Think of the music as an example.
Well,
Yeah.
the music, and then you can take it that if a young couple is trying to have kids and it's not working out, or they're
Sure.
still in the decision-making process, it's when all those family environments, we come together, and sometimes the questioning can be challenging for people, as well as, frankly, where and how to spend it. And that's not unique to people who don't have kids, but
Right.
it's for everyone.
So just it's a time, and I've heard this, I mean, we've all heard that the holidays, maybe especially Christmas, if you suffer some anxiety or some depression, that it just exaggerates that. And I
Exactly.
suppose this is another example.
Yeah, it can be, or it can remind and bring up some things that may have occurred in the past.
Sure.
Yeah, there's a lot of charge in the holidays for everyone, I
Right.
think.
A lot of good, but maybe, I just thought of this, maybe it's expectation, because in the commercials and on the movies, yeah, there's some conflict, but in the end, it's so wonderful. And maybe we hope to achieve that, and the reality is often different.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That there's this idealized version, and then as it unfolds.
Yeah.
And I think what it asks of us all is to just be a little understanding and gentle with each other,
Sure.
and to just recognize that we all have areas that are tender, and we just
Right.
don't know when we might end up walking into those areas.
And I think I remember something that Jenny Berg said. We kind of reviewed this last time. She was, and I think this is accurate, she was with two fellas. They were all at a conference or something, and getting to know each other. And the guy asked her, one of the guys asked her, "Do you have children?" And her thought was, "Why didn't you ask him?"
Yeah.
And so I guess that's an example of an assumption or a lack of empathy, maybe. When we do that kind of, we don't think about it. It's not meant to be hurtful, but it just comes out.
Yeah, it's just a social convention, and one of the
Right.
things I like to remind people of is if you look at the demographics, one time out of every 5 people that you're going to meet,
Right.
Statistically, there'll be a person who doesn't have kids.
Right.
And so just include that in there. And you bring up Jenny, and she's interviewed in the book. And one of the other challenges on holidays, she describes when she and her husband John got together. They had, he has 2 children, and how they had an opportunity to form the holidays in ways that
Oh.
suited everybody in the family unit.
Okay.
And the girls were teenagers, I
Okay.
believe, when that happened. So
That's great. I didn't know that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
We wanted to talk about process,
sure.
and I really want to get there, but I was thinking about something else. Maybe first, you've lived in an urban area, a suburban area, a rural area, the coast,
Yes.
and I was wondering if in those different places, are the demographics different? And or another way to say it would be, when people talk about this kind of thing, is there, do rural people look at it differently than urban people?
Oh, I love that question. It actually does get into process.
Okay. Oh, good.
Because I was in my former husband and I lived in a suburban area, and we had met in an urban area. And when we stopped going through the infertility process, we moved to land outside of Carlton because we realized that the school district was great, but we weren't going to be availing ourselves of it in the suburban area. And it was a fabulous experience, and I think it set up some of the conditions for writing this book and what I needed to find out myself, because I never ran into people that didn't have kids. And so here I was in my early 40s saying, how do I envision how my life might unfold without having kids? Whereas had I stayed in an urban area, there's a much higher prevalence of people that don't have kids in an urban area.
That would have been my guess. I didn't know that.
Yeah, no, it's true.
Yeah.
It's true, yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know, I guess I wonder if people in an urban area are otherwise occupied. In other words, are there more career-oriented folks, or do you have any speculation about that?
Well, yes, I would imagine, though, careers, I mean, we have all different kinds of careers, and that's one of the things I loved about living here, is that getting the exposure to the range of the agricultural, the horticultural areas,
Right.
I mean, all of that, so.
This is, boy, I hope I don't step on any toes here, but I think of rural as sort of, the umbrella is procreation. You know, you're growing
you're
crops,
growing
or you're
things, yeah.
or animals or something.
Right.
And I just wonder if that isn't part of that mindset. That is that too wacky?
No, I don't think it's wacky at all, because one of the things that I loved about getting to know some more of the agricultural parts of it is everything happens for a reason.
Yeah.
It's very purposeful. You know, when you run the tractor around the corners, you can't get to certain parts, and what do you do with that land?
Right.
And so, yeah, and it's about fertility, and
Yeah.
in the city, maybe the fertility is more in the fertility of ideas and connections in an environment that's not as nature driven, because it's a
And
city.
that's a good word too.
Yeah.
I was thinking about, and it just popped into my mind, you're a tractor driver too, aren't you? You know how to do that.
I know how to drive a tractor, yeah. A little rusty now, but.
Yeah. When I went to Cal Poly, which is it's more than this, but it's sort of an agricultural school. And one of the as an English major, I took tractor driving, which of course is a natural segue, and beekeeping.
Wow.
You are, this may not be fair, but I'm going to say you're an academic. I mean, you have a lot of education, but the research that you did, and it was a lot, and I think that's the value of the book, is it's authoritative, but you went off on your own. This is not something that you did in school.
Yeah, I mean, my happy place is school and learning and classes, and I did go back to school, to graduate school in my 60s, and got an MFA in creative writing.
Oh, okay.
And that was just a delight to be in a community of writers, learning from people who made their livings doing writing. But I don't consider myself an academic.
Okay.
This book was driven by the interest, again, that was seeded here in Yamhill County, and to go out and find out how people have crafted their lives when the main culture shows what it's like to have a family. We have pretty clear ideas about that. And what I learned is, contrary to what I said to you earlier, there were quite a few people here in Yamhill County that didn't have kids, but I hadn't looked for them. And as I started to look for them, then I started to gather people's stories, and that was the genesis of the book itself. It was my quest to better understand what might be in store for me.
For yourself first.
Yes.
Okay.
And to learn from people who had traveled the path either side by side with me from a little different perspective, or particularly rewarding for me were the women because I did just talk to women, but now I've had men talk to me like crazy. But the elders that have gone ahead of me has just been so fascinating. And then those stories then planted the seeds of curiosity that led to the more pure research part of it.
Okay.
So one of the delights about being a nonfiction writer is you can sit in the chair and you can go, I'm going to write this thing, and then you go talk to people, and then you go to the library and gather facts and go down that rabbit hole. So it was very pleasant to have my process be able to flex and flow between and betwixt those options.
Speaking of process, when you did this, or would your approach be to just gather a mountain of information and then try to corral it? Or did you have some kind of a methodical, I'm going to start here, I'm going to end up there, and now to do that I need these facts to fill in?
Okay. Again, the quest was the start.
Yeah.
And so I started to talk to people. And then when I realized that people had stories to tell and that they also weren't sharing their stories, with another person that I met, we started hosting small group meetings.
Okay.
Which now I see as being it was like a focus group. And
Oh, that's
themes
interesting.
came up during the course of these meetings that showed that the impacts on our lives when we don't have kids are fairly common. We have impacts on, like anybody, on friendships, on family, on how it manifests at work, all the way through to end of life planning and what kind of legacies that we leave.
See, I hadn't thought of that.
So conveniently, the narrative arc of the book follows the lifestyle, the life cycle.
The life cycle.
And
yeah.
so what are the impacts? Not so much the decision making, though that does weave its way through.
Because that would be prior.
That would be
Yeah,
prior,
and
and I only talk to people who, for whatever reason, whatever came before, knew that they were not going to have children of their own.
Sure.
And that's what I wanted to dive into.
This is personal, but I have exposure to both in that I have two daughters. One daughter and her husband consciously chose not to have children for health reasons.
Yes.
The other daughter had biological children and then felt called to go out and foster a child with an eye toward adoption. And so I get to look at kind of both of those lives and how they structure it.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, we think it's a clear yes/no, but it's not. It's very nuanced. And I read a statistic recently that 75% of pregnancies are unplanned. And so
I'm not surprised.
yeah, I was very surprised. Okay, well, so then people are making their minds up and having surprises, and
Sure.
yeah, it's not clear. It's not clear. It's not simple.
I don't know, how can I phrase this? I wonder if unplanned equals unwelcome. Probably not.
No, no, I don't. I think it's again. I think it's very complex. It's got to be.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, before I move on, you came here to raise sheep.
Yes.
Is that right? And is that a commercial enterprise? It's just for fun? Or?
Actually, the original plan was to grow wine grapes.
Okay.
And my former husband researched it, and he was a home winemaker, and then decided it was way too much work. And so then to deal with the taxes, we needed to have an enterprise. And so sheep was one. And I found raising and having during lambing season, I still ache to be involved with lambing again. And in fact, I was just up on Lopez Island in the San Juans and ended up talking to a woman who said, "You want to come and do lambing? I'll come up to my place this next spring and you can work."
I would think that it would be rewarding, but it would be a lot of work.
It was very much work and very physical work as well. They're not lightweight creatures.
I don't know why this sticks with me, but do you know Barbara Drake?
I know her name.
Know her name.
Yes.
She is professor emeritus from Linfield.
She's up in Yamhill,
and
I
just,
think.
you know, a fabulous writer and a great poet. And I remember reading that she said, people think sheep are dumb, but that's not true. they know exactly enough to be sheep. And I thought that was great. So a couple things. Let me ask you about this last September, which was really just a couple of months ago, was World Childless Week.
Yes.
Talk about that. I didn't know there was such a thing.
Well, I'm glad that you're bringing that up. World Childless Week was started by a woman in the UK.
Okay.
And it has spread throughout the world. It is World Childless Week.
Okay.
And so she started it in 2017. And what's beautiful about it is the design, every day there's a different theme. And so this year, the first day was gathering our stories or telling our stories.
Oh, wow, great.
And I had an opportunity to be the guest on the webinar.
Of course.
To talk about that. And then there were days that were dedicated to creativity, to men's issues, to grieving, all sorts of different
A week
approaches.
is hardly enough, is it?
Well, a week is hardly enough, but what's wonderful about it is there's an archive of each of the years,
Okay.
and then people are invited to include their stories as well. So it is a treasure trove.
Okay.
Not only for people who wanted to have kids and didn't have them, but also for anyone who doesn't have kids or who cares about someone who doesn't.
Sure.
It is just chock full. And then the thing that has been remarkable for me is since the UK version has come out, I've become more aware of the true worldwide nature of the effort and the energy that's being put into it. And so now I have people all over the world that I'm aware of and the work that they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And we are becoming a very well-connected community, and there's a lot of work that is filling the space
Okay.
so that information is available all over the world.
Okay. And then going back to World Childless Week, and you were talking about it being connected, and as you were saying that, I wondered, is there a website or something? How do you, so you're talking to somebody in Holland, maybe.
Yes.
How does that work? Through the internet, I guess.
Yes, it's through the
Okay.
internet, and so during the week there are that it's actually happening live. You can post things there. There's also an active Facebook group that you
Okay.
can join, and I think it's worldchildlessweek.net. If I'm not mistaken, but you just Google
You
World
can
Childless
find it.
Week, and you can find plenty of information about it.
And again, a little side note, but what a world we live in.
Yes.
And the ability to connect is obviously unprecedented.
Yes.
And for all the troubles that we have, if we're not dumb about using these tools, it's a marvel.
Well, and it's also a way in this particular topic that people can have a safe place to go.
Oh, sure.
Maybe they're not even in a place where they're ready to tell their stories, but they have a place that they can go to hear other people's stories in a way that we're talking about the holidays that can help fortify how they want to behave in their real world.
Sure.
And so now there's a lot of material that's being posted about the holidays.
Yeah. And I would think, as cliche as this is, the feeling of I'm not alone
Exactly.
has to be
Exactly.
a big deal.
Exactly.
So we're talking about writing. Writing is words. I think words are important. And I've read some words, and I just wondered about your take on this. I like child-free, childless, which I think has a different feel, and then non-mom. Kind of talk about
Language.
Yeah.
It was very frustrating, and I know I'm not the only one that has been frustrated by the fact that there's no term that is an all-inclusive, non-charged term for who and what we are, though there are terms for every other relationship that exists in a family structure. And so childless and child-free are, they're useful, they're helpful, but everything is the opposite of what being a parent is. And
okay, so that's the baseline or the starting point is child, and then you don't
And
have
so
it.
you become the absence
Right.
of that, which already, that's why child-free came in, and there's
As a
challenge with
try.
that, like, wee,
Right.
and childless is, oh.
Sure.
And there are so many shades in between those two, and I'm very convinced after writing this book that over the course of time, the differentiation of what you started as becomes so much less important, and we tend to come towards the middle because, after all, the way we're living our lives, we're all going through the same process.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
I
the language
just,
is huge.
Well, it is. Oh my goodness, I've just lost his name. S.I. Hayakawa.
Mm-hmm.
Do you
Yes,
remember? Oh,
yes,
you know,
yes,
okay.
San Francisco State.
That's right.
He was, yes,
And that was, language was his big thing.
yes.
And I remember there was an incident where there was a big fire in I think it was in a greenhouse. And he somehow got involved in this, investigating, and said, you know what the problem is? They had labeled, there was a big, what we would call a fan, up in one gable. And he said that the assumption is that and I forget which way he went here, but that, well, I think it was that it would evacuate, a fan blows out. Well, he said, that doesn't do that. And it blows in. And so there was, that's what spread the fire. And it's just we read something and we make an assumption, or we hear a word and make an assumption. Yeah. And so that it's important. Yeah. So I believe that tool got a name change because of what he talked about.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. There are people all over that are trying to come up with terms that apply a little bit better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If this isn't too far afield, we are going through something now with gender pronouns.
Yes, yes.
And the use of they. Mm-hmm. And I read something, I think it was actually in maybe the Oregonian, and about the acceptance of they. Mm-hmm. And somebody said, used for singular,
yes.
For one person.
Yep.
And whoever wrote this said, we do that now. Or we've done it before it became a big deal. And
mm-hmm.
the illustration was, you hear a knock on the door, and you're in the kitchen, and your hands are dirty, and you yell to one of the kids, tell them we can't come.
Ah.
Tell them, and so,
or tell them to come in. Yes,
you're right. But it's
right.
a them, which is plural,
yes.
even though it's probably just one person.
Yeah.
So that was interesting.
Ah.
But
Good
very,
observation.
for an old guy like me, it gets, it's not natural for me, because that's not my background. Yeah. I'm sure willing to try.
And it's a really good discipline too.
Yeah. Well, and I think what it does is, it brings us back to what you were talking about, being unconsciously, if not cruel, at least not thoughtful. You know what I mean?
Yes, and that brings to mind that one of the great surprises and frankly joys of having this book having been out now is I'm getting feedback from parents that I never expected, and one of the things that is most impactful is I'll get, I know that there are people that don't have kids, but
right.
I have never actually taken the time to consider how their lives might be different.
Right.
And so now I'm able to have conversations with people who I'm speaking as a would-be parent, how their lives are impacted, how my life as it is now is impacted. And so there's like all these light bulbs going off that it's just fascinating.
Yeah. Seems like kind of first tier is, I would say, women who are non-moms. Mm-hmm. Then, and I wanted to ask you about men in either situation, but then the second tier is sort of the opposite. It's not the people in the book or that you're trying to clarify for, but it's educational. Yeah. Because, again, I think there are things that it's just natural that aren't on our radar. Mm-hmm. As we settled the country and moved from east to west and decimated some of the forest, there was always more. I mean, it wasn't, this may be too far afield, but what I'm trying to say is there are things that are right in front of us that we don't see.
Yes.
And because that, you don't worry about running out of timber until you're about to run out of timber.
Right, we swim in our own ponds,
Right.
and that's the pond that
Oh, I
we
like
know.
that.
Yeah, it's the
I'm
pond we
stealing
know,
that.
so I give it, I offer it freely.
Yeah.
But it also is, I think that's where there's some real power when we talk about women. We do tend to segment ourselves as like, oh, are you a mom? Oh, if you're a mom, are you a working mom or are you a
Right.
stay-at-home mom?
Right.
Okay, oh, now you don't have kids. Are you childless or child-free? So we take this pie of our wholeness and we
Right.
cut it in all these little pieces.
Sure.
And we do that to ourselves, and that's something that it serves us in some ways, and I think it keeps us separate in other ways.
I think so too. The older I get, the more I think that it tends to separate us. Well, I don't want to run out of time, and we're getting close here. So a couple of things. When you were here before, we saw this. Now the British version is out.
Yes?
There's a visual difference here.
Yes.
Is there anything else substantive? Is it?
The British version
Yeah,
versus
I mean,
the
is there
US version?
spelling differences or?
No, we thought they were going to change the
Okay.
spelling, and for some reason they decided not to.
Okay.
And then there are a couple of translation deals that are in the works right now that
Oh, wonderful.
yeah, that I'm very excited about.
You've really hit on something because it is so universal.
Yeah,
That's great.
yeah, it is.
Well, the other thing I wanted to ask is, you've sort of found a broader audience, with now the couples who have children. But I wondered about men. What have you heard from men? Do they talk to you? Do they have an opinion? Do they?
My favorite thing that I've heard from men is they'll get mad. They're like, how come you just have women in your book? And my response has historically been, well, there's a man out there that can write this book from the male perspective much better than I can. And the pushback has been very interesting. They're like, I would rather talk to you than talk to a guy about this. Now, that being said, there are some men in the UK and in Australia who are doing remarkable work related to the male experience, because it is different.
Sure.
And if I were to write a second book, which I may or may not, I would look at the men's point of view on it, because the differences are substantial and the commonalities are huge.
We've got a couple minutes. Can you talk about that? What, in other words, the difference in the commonality?
I'm thinking about a gentleman I talked to in Dayton, Ohio, and he is single, and he's in his mid-40s, and most of his friends are married. And he was saying that there's a suspiciousness about him that comes back, and that somehow he is going to have an influence that's not altogether positive on his male friends, because he is this unattached male who doesn't have kids to be responsible for.
Right.
So he was reflecting back to himself a feeling of being stigmatized, because he has not found a partner that works well for him, nor has he decided if he is appropriate to be a father. And I found that fascinating. I hadn't thought about that. And then I recently learned that when people are going through infertility, I thought more often the women had the issues as I did. But I learned recently it's actually half and half.
Oh, interesting.
And so there are all those elements in the relationship where
boy, I hadn't.
Yes, and that's the genesis of some of the work of the gentleman that I'm referring to in the UK.
So is there guilt, accusations?
Well, there can be all of that. Oh, and there's a book that came out by a woman, an Oregon author, about entering into a marriage with a man who did not want to have children, and she did. And so the whole negotiation between them as a couple to set it up so that later on there would not be regret and built-in resentments. And it's fascinating to hear their stories. It's called This Particular Happiness.
I'm actually, my wife and I are watching a New Zealand or an Australian series, and one of the plot points is a widower is attracted to a a divorcee, and she wants children, and he doesn't think he does. And that's very, it's actually kind of fluffy in this plot,
Yeah.
except that it's real.
It's
That's
real.
exactly what you were saying.
Yeah, it's very much real and a challenging topic to go through.
Yeah,
Come together.
and I would think for many, many people, I mean, it is such it's a huge commitment, but it's the fulfillment, and I mean, there's all of these aspects, and it's big. So it's not something that you can just say, oh, whatever. I mean, that's not that kind of thing.
Yes, and I've interviewed women who were clear that they did not want to have kids and
Right.
have had to end relationships when the
Right.
man wanted
So
to
it
have
can be
children.
the other way around.
So again, it's just so rich, all the different attitudes, and I think we talked about this last time, is that none of us has the full package in all the ways that we envisioned that our lives would unfold.
Sure.
And so when we can talk through what those different expectations are and how they are fulfilled,
Yeah.
that we have never-ending opportunities
Yeah.
of things to talk about.
And that's really the answer. When I watch some of these shows, they always hinge on miscommunication or lack of communication, and it's obvious in the show, but then we do it in real life.
All the time,
Yeah.
every day.
Wow. Kate Kaufmann, thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
When you get into these other languages, we didn't cover everything, so you got to come back and we'll do that.
With great pleasure.
Okay.
Great question.
Wow, that shot by. Thanks, folks. That's a quick half hour. This is The Writing Life. I'm Stephen W. Long. I'd love to hear from you at stephenwlong.com. Kate, you have a website?
I do. It's katekaufmann.com, Kaufmann.
2 N's.
2 N's.
All right, there you go. All right, we'll see you next time on The Writing Life. Thank you so much.
What do you think? We done?
I don't know. You guys want to do one just with yourself without me doing the
think we're
markers?
done, if they got enough, they got enough.
They got enough? Probably. Okay, sounds good.
Let's go lunch.
Oh,
I'm hungry.
Yeah.
yeah, I could just bite too.